Shalom, family. I won't call any of my family Israel anymore. I'll explain that in another video. April the 8th, 2024. Total eclipse. The second Exodus. 400 years, 40 years, 40 days. These numbers are prophetic. There's a lot of anticipation right now. I see it all across YouTube. People actually think that they know what's going to happen. The best that you can hope for and the best that you can guess at is the fact that nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. But what we do know is it ain't going to be pretty. So what's up with these numbers? What do they have to do with the eclipse, the Exodus, and biblical history? Well, let's get into it. The mystical meaning of the next eclipse. Amazingly enough, the totality eclipse, which took place on a Monday across the continental United States in the year 2017, was not the end of the story. While eclipses of this magnitude are rare occurrences, scientists tell us that if you stood in one place on the earth, you would have to wait on an average of another 360 years until you saw another total eclipse. This time around, it's going to be different. A sequel is due on April 8th, 2024. This proximity of time is almost beyond belief. It defies the laws of averages. It means that anyone who might have missed the blackout of the sun in 2017 will have another chance to join the millions who shared viewing this magnificent cosmic performance on August 21st, 2017. But there is something even more remarkable about this double feature. The path of the eclipse in 2017 went from northwest to southeast, from Oregon to South Carolina. It reached this point of greatest duration. That's a key word right here. A few miles south of Carbondale, Illinois. The totality lasted for about 2 minutes and 38 seconds. In 2024, the eclipse will wind its way in the opposite direction, from the northeast to the southwest. There is one point which will mark this intersection between the 2017 eclipse and the one to come. The meeting of the two different paths across the United States, as if making the center of a large X. It's precisely in the very same spot in Illinois where the last totality happened. The complete eclipse of the sun will be repeated for the greatest length of time. The exact point where the 2017 and the 2024 lines of totality cross in Cedar Lake in Jackson County, just south of Carbondale, which is a town called Little Egypt. You can't make this stuff up, people. What I'm about to show you guys, you really need to pay very close attention and understand it's time to get your house in order. Clean up, straighten up, fix up. Whatever you got to do to get yourself right, you need to get on it right now. So here's a diagram of the eclipse from 2017 and the 2024. You notice the Hebrew alphabet Aleph. That's this right here. This is called an Aleph in Hebrew. All right. This letter represents the Creator's name. Yeah. Also notice the Hebrew letter Tav. This letter represents truth. That's right here. This is where the X marks the spot. Depending on how you look at it, that is the letter Tav. This is no coincidence. This is no coincidence. For those skeptical about the celestial signs, I have connected the upcoming eclipse to a verse in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 8. It reads, where God tells Moses that if the people don't believe the first sign, they will believe the second. Think about that for a minute. Let it sink in. The first Exodus and the second Exodus, there were signs given in the first Exodus. Trust me on that. If the people don't believe the first sign, they will believe the second one. This biblical connection adds weight to the belief that this eclipse is not just a regular occurrence, but a divine message. And yes, these numbers I showed you up above, they play a very important role in this event, either directly or indirectly. I'll show you what I mean. In a down-to-earth explanation of eclipse, historically, God uses the moon. God uses the moon to communicate with his chosen people. How about that, y'all? Remember the new moon? Who do you think he was talking to when he brings that new moon every single month? You know, the one people say is all hogwash. There's nothing real about it. Which is why they keep Saturday, Sabbath. Yeah, that's the moon I'm talking about. Better ask somebody. God uses the moon to communicate with his chosen people. That's the reason that you need to understand the new moon. It tells you the seventh day. And it ain't Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It is just a seventh day. That seventh day comes from the counting of the day after you see the new moon. There is no name attached to that day. Just thought I'd let you know. God uses the moon to communicate with his chosen people. And he uses the sun to communicate with the Gentiles. Whoa. Eclipses is a way that God grabs our attention. He's telling us to look up and pay attention to what he's saying. Breaking down the symbolism of the eclipse path, forming an X across the United States. In Hebrew, the X means a prophetic sign and the signature of the Creator himself. Highlighting the intersection point at Little Egypt, he adds that it symbolizes literally King David, the Prince of Peace. That's who's coming as your Savior. That's your Messiah. Better get it right, y'all. On August 21st, 2017, the Great American Eclipse made headlines all over the nation. It was also known as the Seven Salem Eclipse. Notice that number 7? We're going to take a good look at that. Because the path of that eclipse crossed over 7 U.S. locations named Salem. I'm sure that those who have studied their book knows that Salem once or has represented Jerusalem. Jerusalem, you get it? Yeah. That path of that eclipse crossed over 7 U.S. locations named Salem. You can't make this up. And here's the list: Salem, Oregon; Salem, Idaho; Salem, Wyoming; Salem, Nebraska; Salem, Missouri; Salem, Kentucky; and Salem, South Carolina. And guess what? It's 7. That number 7 is extremely important. You need to pay attention to the signs up in the heavens and the numbers they represent. Now the second great American eclipse is almost here. And the path of that eclipse will also cross over 7 U.S. locations named Nineveh. Know you've heard about Nineveh. Let's take a look at those 7. Nineveh, Texas; Nineveh, Missouri; Nineveh, Indiana; Nineveh, Ohio; Nineveh, Pennsylvania; Nineveh, Virginia; Nineveh, New York. Pay attention to the number 7 because it is the number of completion or perfection. The number 7 is significant in the Bible, appearing over 700 times throughout the Old Testament. In biblical numerology, 7 symbolizes completion or perfection. It is a fact that God created the world in 6 days and he rested on the what? 7th. On the 7th. So, what's the big deal with the numbers? The number 400. 400, the number of bondages. You're going to understand what I'm talking about in a minute. I gave a lot of examples where all the uses of the number 400 and a few others. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So let's take a look at some of those things. Abraham's purchase of a burial site cost him 400 shekels. Esau's pursuit of Jacob with 400 men. Then you have the 400 pomegranates. You have the 400 young virgins of Jabesh Gilead. You have the 400 prophets of the grove. You have the 400 discontented men who came to David. The 400 pomegranates. 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 42. And 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks. Even 2 rows of pomegranates for 1 network to cover the 2 bowls of the chapiters that were upon the pillars. The number 400 is closely associated with the subject of bondage in the scriptures. I'm going to show you that too. When Solomon and the children of Israel built the temple, there were 2 pillars or columns in the front porch of the temple. Upon these 2 pillars were 2 chapiters, which had 2 bowls. Upon the 2 bowls were 2 networks, and upon the 2 networks were a total of 400 pomegranates. Tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. Solomon assigned names to the 2 pillars. The right pillar was named Jachin or Jachin, and the left pillar was named Boaz. The name Jachin literally means he will establish. Jachin was a high priest of the tribe of Levi, of the order of Aaron. Boaz was a great grandfather of King David. The two pillars, therefore, recognize both the priesthood of Israel and the kingdom of Israel. The 400 pomegranates are at the very apex of these pillars. Pomegranates were a part of the hem of the robe of the high priest. The robe had a hem that had attached alternating a golden bell and a pomegranate. A golden bell and a pomegranate, etc. The robe of the high priest speaks to us about the work of our high priest. The golden bell gave a ring. Following the golden bell was a pomegranate, which is a very fruitful fruit. It has lots of inner fruits inside the outer cast or the outer coat. In comparison to the golden bell and the 400 pomegranates at the apex of the two pillars is comparable to the work of our high priest, the 400 prophets of groves. We read of these 400 prophets in the following verse or verses of Scripture. 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 19. Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal, 450, and the prophets of the groves, 400, which eat at Jezebel's table. 1 Kings chapter 22 and verse 6. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and said unto them, shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? And they said, go up, for the Lord shall deliver it into the hand of the king. The key thing I'm bringing out here is 400. No doubt the prophets of the grove promoted both natural and spiritual fornication. They themselves were under bondage. It shouldn't be hard to put this together, y'all. They were under bondage to a false worship system and brought those who followed them under the same bondage. New Testament. Today there are false teachers who teach things they ought not to teach for filthy lucre's sake. These make themselves to appear to be the minister of righteousness. Many false teachers teach lies. They're in bondage to the working system of religion. Remember, we don't have a religion, and we should not claim religion. We have laws, statutes, and commandments. So they're working in bondage to the working system of religion. This is why they throw all this garbage out there at you without doing any research or confirming whatever information they find to make sure they bring you the truth. Here's the one thing I do know. There is not one person on this planet that knows every single thing about scriptures in our book. Not one. So here's what I believe. Each person should wait. If you really are called to teach this word, you should not sit down and put your lesson together all from your own head and from your own heart. You should wait until that spirit gives you a lesson, because you don't know what the people need to hear, but the Creator does. So let Him tell you when and what to teach. This is another reason why I see a lot of people teaching, and some of them I listen to halfway until I can't take no more, and I know for a fact the Creator didn't give them that message. Or they got a lot of good stuff in there, but they got a lot of stupid stuff too. You can't mix those things. You either tell all truth or none of it. So, They are in bondage to the working system of religion, and those who have believed them are in the same bondage with them. Only through hearing and believing the truth can those people be delivered from their bondage. The wall of Jerusalem broken down and the bondage of idolatry. In Genesis chapter 27, we get a hint of Esau's anger at Jacob because of Jacob's taking away his birthright, which actually Jacob didn't take it, Esau sold it. Second Chronicles chapter 25, verse 20. But Amaziah, who would not hear, for it came of God, that he might deliver them into the hand of their enemies, because they sought after the gods of Edom. So Joash, the king of Israel, went up, and they saw one another in the face, both he and Amaziah, king of Judah, at Beth Shemesh, which belonged to Judah, and Judah was put to the worse before Israel. And they fled every man to his tent. And Joash, the king of Israel, took Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, at Beth Shemesh, and brought him to Jerusalem, and brake down the wall of Jerusalem from the gate of Ephraim to the corner gate, 400 cubits. By now, y'all should start seeing something very important about the number 400. If not, we got more. And he took all the gold and the silver and all the vessels that were found in the house of God with Obed-Edom, and the treasures of the king's house, the hostages also, and returned to Samaria. Amaziah was king over Judah during the time of the divided kingdom. Amaziah at first had done that which was right in the sight of the Creator, and God had prospered him to defeat the Edomites who had come out against Judah. However, Amaziah set up and sought after the gods of Edom after that he had defeated Edom. Consequently, Amaziah brought himself and Judah under the bondage of idolatry. Amaziah was lifted up in pride after having defeated Edom, and considered not that it was by the Lord's deliverance that he was able to defeat Edom. He turned his back on the God of Judah and sought after the gods of the land he had defeated. Talk about stupid. Because of his pride, Amaziah sought to do battle against the king of Israel. Subsequently, Israel, under Joash, the king of Israel, put Judah to worse during the battle, and Joash tore down 400 cubits. 400. Watch these numbers, y'all. 400 cubits of the wall of Jerusalem, and took all the gold and the silver and all the vessels that were found in the house of God. Because of Amaziah's idolatry, he and Judah lost the Lord's help in battle, lost the defending wall of Jerusalem, and lost the silver and gold and precious things out of the house of God. Any time that we practice idolatry, we are brought into the bondage of that idolatry. The people of Israel, scattered all across the four corners of the earth, 400 years. We lose the daily help of our Lord when we lose fellowship with God. We lose our defense against our enemies, and we lose the precious blessings of the house of God. Surely idolatrous worship is not worth losing any of these things. When we worship and serve the one true Creator in spirit and in truth, we are delivered from the bondage of idolatry and have great freedom, including precious fellowship with our Creator, daily help from the Creator in the midst of our trials, the Creator's hedge about us, and the precious blessings of the house of the living Creator. The meaning of the number 400. I put a graph up here. I decided not to go through it because I don't want to confuse anybody. But this is a chart, and it shows you what each one of these numbers mean biblically. Now, I'm not a numerologist, and I'm not a gematria, but it doesn't change the fact that these numbers were and is in our Holy Scriptures. Nothing is in that book that doesn't have a meaning or prophetic stand. The number 400, which is arrived at by multiplying 8 by 50, derives its meaning in Scripture by being a divinely perfect period. The Creator, after making a covenant with Abraham, revealed to him that his descendants would be afflicted in a foreign land for 400 years. The Eternal, after this period, promised to bring them back into the land of Canaan. You must surely know that your seed shall be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also will judge that nation, and I also will judge that nation whom they shall serve. And afterward they shall come out with great substance. But in the fourth, don't think this fourth doesn't have anything to do with 444, yes, but in the fourth generation they shall come here again. Genesis chapter 15 and verse 13, 14, and 16. The count of 400 years also began with the confirmation of the covenant to Abraham's seed through Isaac, Genesis chapter 22. This event took place in 1845 BC. 400 years later, in 1445, the Israelites are freed from Egyptian bondage. David, fleeing the wrath of King Saul, ends up in a cave near Adullam. As he resides there, 400 men gather with him in support. 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1 to 2. Y'all, these numbers are not coincidental. The Creator does not do coincidence. Remember that. He does not do coincidence. Everything you see has a purpose. One day David sends 10 of his young men to a wealthy man named Nabal in order to request food. Nabal rudely responds to David's request and sends the young men away empty-handed. David's response is to gather 400 of his fighting men in order to attack and to destroy Nabal and all the males who serve him. Abigail, Nabal's wife, learns of her husband's folly and is able to turn away David's wrath. 1 Samuel chapter 25. Persian King Cyrus allows captive Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple destroyed by the Babylonians. According to the Bible, after God's temple is rebuilt, it is rededicated with the offering of 400 lambs. and a number of other beasts. Ezra chapter 6. There is no such thing as a coincidence, and you cannot make this up. Appearances of number 400. Abraham's wife Sarah is the only woman in Scripture where her age at death is stated in Genesis 23 and verse 1. Abraham, when she dies at the age of 127, buys a cave in Machpelah, Hebron, and the land surrounding it for 400 shekels of silver. He then uses the cave as a burial location for his beloved wife. And Abraham hearkened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed to Ephron the silver which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, as incurred among the merchants. Genesis chapter 23 and verse 16. The location Abraham purchased will end up being a family cemetery. His sons Isaac and Ishmael bury him in the same cave as Sarah when he dies. Isaac and his wife Rebekah, as well as Jacob and his wife Leah, will also be ultimately buried in the same place. Elijah openly challenged 450 false prophets of Baal and Jezebel's 400 false prophets of the groves to meet him at Mount Carmel. The purpose of the meeting is to determine whom Israel should worship. The prophets of Baal accept his challenge, but Jezebel prophets do not. Those who serve Baal are ultimately slaughtered after the Creator miraculously consumes through fire the offering of Elijah. 1 Kings chapter 18. Conflict, resolution, and number 400. 400,000, that is 400 times 1,000. Israelites show up at Mizpah upon hearing of a vile crime committed by some men whom the tribe of Benjamin refuses to release for punishment. Judges chapter 19 and verse 20. The tribe of Benjamin ultimately pays dearly for their foolish decision, which almost all their fighting men, including most of the people living in their territory, put to death. A lone holdout of 600 Benjamite men are offered 400 virgins as wives so that the tribe might not die out. Judges chapter 21, verses 12 to 14. The turmoil finally ended when another 200 females are made available to the surviving Benjamites. Jacob was not nice to his brother Esau. He took advantage of Esau's hunger and used it to buy his birthright blessing. Genesis chapter 25. Later, conspiring with his mother Rebekah, he tricked Isaac into thinking he was Esau so that he could receive the blessing of the firstborn. Genesis chapter 27. Jacob, after discovering Esau's plans to kill him, flees to Haran. Jacob and his growing family, roughly 20 years later, began their journey back to Canaan. He soon finds out that Esau and 400 men are coming toward him. Genesis 32, verse 6. He divides his clan into two large groups and prepares to offer Esau a large present. After wrestling with the stranger all night, Genesis chapter 32, 24 to 32, the Creator grants him favor in his brother's eyes, and his life is spared. Now, there's a lot more info on biblical meaning of 400. There are no original language words in the Old Testament text, Hebrew or Greek, that occur 400 times. 400 is the product of 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 2 to the fourth power times 5 squared. 400 is also equal to 20 times 20, 20 squared. The number 400 is the Hebrew alphabet, is represented by its 22nd letter, Tav. Remember what I showed y'all on the eclipse map? I showed you the Tav. It looks like an X, but if you turn it around, it is a T, Tav. Let me read this again. The number 400 in the Hebrew alphabet is represented by its 22nd letter, Tav. Now you see the connection with 400 and the eclipse coming? In the Greek alphabet, it is represented by the letter of Salah. The first 40 years. Oh yeah, the number 40. The number 40 is a derivative of the number 400. All right? The first 40 years of Moses, life entails him from growing up in Pharaoh's household and living in Egypt until he slays a man and has to flee to Midian. The second part of his life is spent as a shepherd in the wilderness until the Creator calls him at 80 years old to save his people. During the last third of his life, he leads the Israelites out of Egypt and wanders in the wilderness until he dies at age 120. Check this out. 40 times 3 equals what? 120. So yeah, 40 is significant. Moses was also on Mount Sinai on 2 separate occasions for 40 days and 40 nights. Exodus 24 verse 18, Exodus 34 verse 1 to 28. In order to receive the Creator's laws, he also sent spies for 40 days to investigate the land that the Creator promised the Israelites as an inheritance. Numbers chapter 13, verse 25, Numbers chapter 14 and verse 34. Because of their sins, after leaving Egypt, the Creator swore that the generation of Israelites who left Egyptian bondage would not enter their inheritance in Canaan. Deuteronomy chapter 12. The children of Israel were punished by wandering the desert in the wilderness for 40 years before a new generation was allowed to possess the promised land. The book of Exodus in the King James translation is the only one that contains 40 chapters. The chapters Exodus 25, Numbers 29, Judges chapter 6 and 11, 1 Chronicles chapter 7 and 8 and 12, Job chapter 31, Psalms chapter 37, Jeremiah chapter 23 and Jeremiah chapter 31, and John chapter 18, which I wish I hadn't put that in there. That's not important. So Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 31, and Jeremiah chapter 18, they all have 40 verses. They all have 40 verses. From the time they entered the promised land to the time of King Saul, Israel was sporadically governed by a number of individuals known as judges. Though they did not like or rule like a king, they nevertheless had a tremendous influence on the people, as they represented the Creator and were inspired to execute His will. Judges who served 40 years include Othniel, Deborah, and Barak, Eli, and Gideon. The first three human kings over the children of Israel were Saul, David, and Solomon. Each one ruled 40 years. Are y'all getting this? After the United Kingdom split into two separate pieces, King Joash served this many official years, 39 actual years as one of Judah's better kings. Abraham tried to bargain with the Creator to not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah if 40 righteous people were found within it. Genesis chapter 18 and verse 29. Both Isaac and Esau were 40 years old when they first married. Genesis 25 and verse 20, and Genesis 26 and verse 34. Period of trial of testing. Elijah went 40 days without food or water at Mount Horeb. Y'all excuse me for a second. The Creator flooded the earth. The Creator flooded the earth by having it rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Genesis chapter 7 and verse 12. After the patriarch Jacob, who is Israel, died in Egypt, the Egyptians spent 40 days embalming his body. Genesis chapter 50 and verse 3. The Creator allowed the ancient Israelites from time to time to be harassed and dominated by certain enemies in order to chastise and humble them for their sins. The Philistines in the southern and western parts of Israel's land harassed them from 1105 to 1065 BC. The Creator's resolution to the harassment was Samson, who would become one of Israel's judges. Judges chapter 13 verse 1 and 1 Samuel chapter 7 verse 13 and chapter 15 verse 17 for 40 years. The number 40 and prophecy. The prophet Jonah powerfully warned ancient Nineveh for 40 days that its destruction would come because of its many sins. Jonah chapter 3 verse 4. The prophet Ezekiel was commanded by the Creator to first lay on his left side for 390 days for the kingdom of Israel. He was then told to lay on his right side for 40 days for the kingdom of Judah. Ezekiel chapter 4 verse 1 through 6. This act represented in years the length each kingdom would suffer correction for their disobedience to the Creator. King Ahaz, who ruled over the kingdom of Judah from 735 to 715 BC, died when he was 40 years old. So why do I bring all this up? The sun is roughly 400 times larger than the moon. But the sun also happens to be 400 times further away than the moon. 1619 to 2019, 400 years. Listen, these numbers are not coincidental. None of them. They all serve a purpose. One more time. Aleph, the name of the Creator. Tav, truth. This is judgment. This is judgment, and there is no way out. This is why I tell y'all, the new moon is not a joke. It's not some fable created by man. It is a real deal. Learn it or leave it. But you can't have it both ways. All of these numbers that we just went through They all tied into this eclipse. They all represent a purpose. Nobody can tell anybody what's going to happen, but I can tell you this much. Whatever it is going to be the biggest thing since the creation of man, and it ain't going to be pretty. Shalom.